The series begins in the desert of Yemen with a Bedouin man who sees something strange coming down from the sky. Suddenly, she is so afraid of the beauty that is with him that she runs out, and then the thing that came down from the sky will move towards it and stand in front of it. So the Bedouin man tries to touch him, but suddenly, a big explosion occurs and he dies. And in another place in one of the American counties, the sheriff Blooms, who is preparing for his last day at work before retiring, and Peggy has a report that a farmer's truck has been stolen. So the sheriff goes with his assistant to the place of the accident, and he knows from the farmer that he is with his nephews. And this is because they use it to prepare drugs. Suddenly, the warden sees a large group of crows hovering in a certain place in the middle of the farms. He goes in his car to the place and finds a drop in the ground level, and you won't be at the same level as the rest farm. He and his assistant think that the people who stole the truck tried to hide the evidence, but suddenly a huge flock of bats comes running at full speed towards the sheriff and his assistant, so much so that they fall to the ground from their strength and speed. Then the sheriff completes his investigations into the theft of the truck, and he feels that it is a kidnapping, not just a theft, and that the two young men accused of stealing the Arabic car are in fact kidnapped. But everyone around the sheriff thinks that he has gone crazy because it is his last day at work, and no one believes him. And in New York, in the United States, the family of Sarah and Ahmed and their children Luke and Lucy are blooming. And Sarah wakes up before everyone else and prepare breakfast for them, and then you wake up every single one of them. And bizarre, they are a very happy family. And Sarah goes to her work after she takes her children to school, and her husband also goes to work. And at school he enters. Kids share music, but every child bleeds from his nostrils abnormally. The whole school is being taken to the hospital, and this is with what remains the only child who did not bleed from his nostrils. And Sarah goes to the hospital, and she is afraid, and she takes her children to examine them herself, and she tries to communicate with Ahmed, but he stays at work and his mobile is switched off. Sarah checks on her children and returns home, and there you spend the whole day with them to reassure them, and they stay waiting for their father until he comes back. On the family's app, they notice that their father is somewhere in the city, although he is a traveler. Sarah gets worried and decides to go to the place where he is. She is surprised when she sees him in the house of another girl, who reveals that he is having an affair with her. Sarah is shocked and walks away devastated, and she comes home with her children while she is not. Confirm what happened. Elsewhere in Tokyo, the capital of Japan, Captain Murad blooms, and who will be an astronaut for one of the space agencies similar to NASA, and she talks on television about the purpose of their trip, which will be about 1/4 of a kilometer away from the ground. It will be the longest flight in history, and this is in order to study the conduct of long trips on the human body with a goal in space more, and Captain Murray prepares for the trip and enters the boat, and the communications engineer comes to check the communication devices, and it appears that she is a close friend of Morel, and she bids farewell to her, and she walks and comes to the takeoff stage of the space missile. And it successfully exits the atmosphere, and in another place in Britain and in one of the schools, he rides with his friends on the school bus, and this is so that they will go on a trip together. And it turns out that Casper is being bullied by his friends because of the state of epilepsy that comes to him, and he must have the medicines with him all the time. On the way, he sees the sheep running as if they were afraid, so he becomes very afraid, and his epileptic point begins, and suddenly an explosion occurs on the road, causing the bus to derail. We return to the district commissioner while he is attending his retirement party, and suddenly he feels sad for himself and his life, and he goes to the place where the crows were and stands in the middle of the farms while looking at the sky, and he speaks to God and tells him to show him anything that indicates that his life had a meaning, and suddenly something unknown appears behind him and hits him with something similar to a bullet, which is the reason for his death. And Sarah does not believe that her financial life turned out not as she thought. And suddenly it happens. A large explosion causes power outages and fires spread in homes and streets, so Sarah quickly takes her children and they go down to the basement. And they think it's just a hurricane or a strong storm. Sarah decides to go out and see what is happening in the streets, but Ahmed decides to come out instead, and he meets people on the streets, and he sees houses burnt down, and no one understands what is happening. And Sarah graduated too. Everyone notices that Sarah and Ahmed's house is the only house that has not been destroyed, nor has there been a single fire. So Ahmed tells them that they are definitely Mazuzan, but suddenly they hear Luke screaming loudly. They quickly enter the house. They see Luca putting his hand on his butt and screaming and telling him to shut up. Sarah examines him and finds no symptoms, so she tries to reassure him, but Luke tells her that there is a voice speaking to him, and he says Ojo to him, and you don't understand. Sarah needs to be removed from the place, and she decides to travel to another place. And she rides the car with her children and moves towards the airport, and we go to Captain Murray in the ship, and she sees a letter from her friend, Mai, which contains a picture of the sunrise. Suddenly, one of the astronauts sees something strange coming towards them. Suddenly, the ship explodes without warning, and everyone dies. Instead of the trip being a victory for Japan in the world of space, joy turned into tragedy and pain, and in one of the US military barracks in Pakistan, the US Army continues to fight ISIS, and the band goes to school there. There, they find that children are bleeding from their nostrils. Suddenly, they see a strange sandy tornado in the middle of the desert. So they go towards it. They run from a berm. Suddenly he appears in front of a giant being, and before they hit him with fire, a very big explosion occurs, and yet a little bit superior to the squad leader. But he finds himself alone and there is no one from his squad around him, and he will be in the middle of the desert and his shoulder will be cleared, so he prefers not to go around for his owner. But because of the heat of the sun, he falls and faints. After a while, a Bedouin man comes to bandage his wound and give him water, and the two of them speak a different language, and none of them understand the other, until the Bedouin man tells him the name of the village, and whoever knows her. He asks him to give it to her. On the second day, he reaches the village. There is a GPS device, and he finds Trevor himself in front of a hospital, and he keeps walking in it until he reaches the basement, and there he finally finds one of his squad, but suddenly he hears the sound of the fighting squads from ISIS, and he knows that the hospital has reported him, so he runs away quickly while carrying his friend and rides the car, but he discovers that his friend died, and between Trevor's breakdown, he didn't know what he saw. What should he do after he lost contact with the main headquarters? In New York State, Sarah moves with her family to a place outside the city. They spend the night in the hotel, and Sarah sees Ahmed looking at his girlfriend's pictures on his mobile phone. Sarah pretends that she is sleeping until the next day, and then they ride their car to continue their way, until they go to a gas station. And there, people choke on petrol, and Ahmed beats one of them. And you get a fight. So Sarah steals another Arab, and you call on Ahmed. And they ride together. On the way, Luke tells them that he wants to go to the bathroom. So Sarah stops the Arab and stops fighting with Ahmed, until suddenly they find that Luke has disappeared. They kept looking for it all day long, until they reach the house in the middle of the forest. Finally, they find Luke hiding there. And in the city of Tokyo, you will not know what happened before the moment of the explosion. The ship, but the Japanese government controls the agency and seizes all the devices to know for itself what happened, so it steals the manager's card and locks itself in the door so that it can reach the last recording of Captain Mori, and finally reaches the last recording, and raises the sound and hears the word Waju. And after a while the special forces are able to enter and they are dismissed from work. Exactly, she thinks about the strange name that was said before the moment the ship exploded, and she goes to Captain Murray in her house, where she used to live with her father, and there she tells him what happened. So Mr. Murray asks her to turn on the recording, and Mr. Murray raises the sound to the end, and suddenly they find the sand in the farm moving by itself because of the intensity of the sound. So Mr. asks her, Murray, if they have huge loudspeakers in the space agency, then you will tell him who they really have, and we will return to the bus that derails after what happens. An explosion on the road, but no one cares, and they think that the teacher lost control of the bus due to severe convulsions, and they make a sharpening because of it. And they fall on a cliff and get minor scratches, but their teacher dies alone, and Casper gets bullied more after they accuse One of the bullies named Montan that the reason is the sharpness, so Casper tells them they have to go out on the road, but Montan sees himself as the leader and takes the vote of the rest of the students, and decides that they stay in their place until help comes for them, and they sleep a whole night alone, and at dawn Montan blooms. And he puts out the fire, as if he wants to stay in control for a longer period. After a while, the rest of the students wake up and think about what they are supposed to do, and they divide the food and water in order for them to sit for a longer period of time. Montaigne goes to Casper about the distress he is causing him, and he asks him if his father will leave them because the convulsions that happened to him, so he tells him that his father is the reason why his mother is sitting after he pushed her off the stairs. He says that at that time he was unable to do anything out of fear, and he says that at the time the ambulance arrived, his father had run away and left them forever. Suddenly Montaigne laughs hysterically, and he says he's stupid, and that he took a story from him that he would tell to all their friends, and running quickly towards their colleagues, and he tells them that whoever saw his mother being beaten in front of them couldn't do anything, and that his mother based because of him, and Casper gets shocked and runs quickly towards the rocks that come out on the road, and keeps climbing them until he reaches the road in front of the eyes of all those who do not believe his courage and decide that they go after him and reach the road. And their Montan orders them to stay waiting for their place, but Casper refuses. And he continues his way, and the rest of the students follow him, as they make fun of Montan and tell him that he died, which means in the game of chess the death of the king. Montaigne is forced to move after them, and on the way they come across a large cart for sweets. They take everything they need from her and fight between the one who wants to stay in his place and the one who moves. They split into two groups, and he moves home. In Pakistan, he reaches the military housing, but he discovers that everything in it has completely disappeared. He tries to communicate with anyone outside the base, whether from America or the coalition forces, but to no avail. Suddenly, he finds an intermittent piece of paper ordering them to quickly evacuate immediately and to declare a state of emergency. On the outskirts of New York City, Sarah decides to go out to buy food, and she goes alone, but you discover that people took everything and there was no food of any kind, and suddenly the troops come. And you ask her if she is okay, so Sarah tells them that she is fine and that she is a doctor. They tell her that they need more doctors, and they ask her to come with them to the emergency tents, because there are a large number of infected people and fewer doctors. Sarah agrees and goes with them. There you meet Angela, and who performs an operation for one of the patients, before the wound closes. Sarah notices something strange inside his body, so you take it out and it becomes a strange body similar to an octopus, but the size of the finger's mind and the patient's bino, and the operation succeeds. In Tokyo, Mai goes to her manager at the agency and makes him hear what she heard. He tells her that she is not the only one who heard him, and that is why they are bringing linguistic experts, and this is because they discovered that the word that was said was not from the vehicle itself. It is also impossible to stay outside the vehicle. This is because sound does not travel through space, and it means that they mean a language without a sound coming from another vehicle, and that there is only one explanation in front of them. So you are shocked and tell him aliens. And this remains the only explanation, and then you ask him to enter the crisis room, and her hands are equipment to reveal the true source of the sound. He tells her that he will not be able to officially hand her the equipment, but he lets her steal it with his identity card in her hands, and he asks her to know what happened, and suddenly the President of the United States of America announces the interruption of all means of communication in the whole world, the intrusion of huge explosions all over the world, and announces that the reason is an external alien attack that history has not witnessed before, and that is why all humankind must he is in one hand against this attack, and asks everyone who has shelter to embrace what they do not have, because until now they do not know how they will face this attack, and it will shock the world. It's all from the US President's speech. After I translate everything, and we go to Sarah, who stays in the ambulance car with the rest of the doctors, but suddenly she decides to get out of the car to go back to her children after she heard about the aliens' attack on the school, everywhere, and at night. She finally reaches the house where they are sitting in the forest, but she finds The world dark and there is no one, and suddenly she hears the sound of something breaking into the place, so she quickly hides in the upper floor, and suddenly she sees the corpse of the dog in front of her, so she becomes very afraid, and suddenly the roof opens in front of her and she finds her husband and children with them in the house, and they all sit together while trying not to make any sound, but the owner of the house breaks down and raises her voice, and still wants to expel Sarah and her family from the house, and be collapsing with fear, and suddenly you fall, Lucy, from the ceiling, which is a sand, and you go down to the floor below. So Sarah goes down behind her to calm her down, and they hide in a place in the house, and they see the alien in front of them, and who looks very savage. Suddenly, the object penetrates the ceiling, and he catches the owner of the house until he kills her completely, so Ahmed Malouj escapes quietly. Sarah sees them and asks them to come quickly, but Ahmed tells her that he will try to open the door of the house, but suddenly the creature attacks him, so Lucy screams in fear. And he discovers their whereabouts, so they quickly run away from the window and enter the car. Suddenly, the owner of the house comes out with the Arabic key in their hands and prepares his gun. But the creature attacks him and kills him. Sarah tries to move quickly in Arabic, but the creature breaks the buzz and attacks them. Sarah hits him with the gun, but he doesn't die, and you prefer to hit him, but without benefit, and before the creature kills her, she finds a strange metal stone next to her, so she puts it in the creature's bug, and whoever gets close to him dies easily, so Sarah throws the creature outside the car while it collapses. Before you move, you find Ahmed leaving the house bleeding, so she takes him with her in the car and goes for a walk. After a while, Ahmed stops breathing, and Sarah is forced to stop the car in order to save him, and put a tube for him to breathe, and you can save his life. After a while, they find an empty restaurant. They spent the night there, and they ate while enjoying their time. Ahmed is impressed by Sarah when he finds that she can shop skillfully. Violin saved his life and killed the alien herself, and also cook. Sarah tells him that he doesn't know anything about her. On the second day, Sarah moves with the rest of her family to the shelter from the military shelters. There she meets Dr. Angela, who welcomes her, so you ask him to treat her husband, and she sits in a separate place from the refugees because she is a doctor. Her children are surprised and ask her if she is really a doctor, so she tells them that she studied at the Faculty of Medicine, but before she graduated, she got pregnant and couldn't continue as a doctor. So he apologizes to her, and that's because she was pregnant with it, but Sarah tells him that she wanted him, and that's why I left studying in Pakistan. He moves in his car to circle the base of American planes. He meets one of the residents with his family and learns that all currents were destroyed and all people died. He is shocked and asks them about the place they are going to. He tells him that they are going to the capital, Kabul, so he is surprised and tells them that the distance is more than a kilo, and he makes them ride with him in the car. After a while, they arrive at Kabul airport. He can easily enter because he is an American soldier, and he let the family he arrived with him enter as well. They thank the head of the family and pray for him that God will protect him. He tells him that if he had known him, he would not have prayed for him, and if not the Lord who protects him. But the head of the family tells him that our master Moses crossed the whole desert alone, and this is because our Lord was with him. And we go to Casper and the rest of his friends on their way to London. Suddenly, they meet a car walking on the road at full speed. Casper stands in front of the Arab with all the courage to stand, and you really stop Arabic. And it appears that one woman will be collapsed, and blood on her body and her clothes. Casper asks her to bring them back to London, but the woman tells them that she will run away and that all the people died. Casper tells her that all of their families are there and that they must return. The owner of the car knows that the children do not have any information about what is happening. You tell them that aliens have invaded planet and no one is able to stand intended, but none of the children believed her and thought she was crazy, but you tell them that it was the President of America who announced this the night before, and she let them ride with her to see for themselves what happened, and you take them to the city of London, and there, everyone goes to his house. He sees the destroyed streets and houses, and he goes with Jamila, and what she tells him is that she always feels that he is different, and if he knows something, they don't know it. Casper tells her that
Sometimes he hears voices speaking to him inside his brain, and he doesn't know if it has anything to
do with me or not, and he shows her his drawings, which are similar to aliens. As if he knew that they came from his childhood, and we go to Tokyo. After she can steal the equipment she needs, we go to the headquarters of
the communications center in Tokyo. There she pretends to be the head of the project and sits down
with the rest of the team. There she is sure that Captain Mori and her team are still
alive, and that what they heard is that this is a distress for them. And we discover that there is
a certain pattern for the last recording on the ship, and the patterns remain recurring. It was a complete network with specific patterns parallel to their network. So it decides to hack into the network of patterns so that it can determine their meaning. And see in the sound aggregation curve a distinct point for all patterns, so she asks one of the team to remove it and see if it was the cacophony that caused the noise in the frequency, and at the time when it mixes between the sound pattern in the vehicle and the other patterns. The security forces arrive and arrest it, but Mai remains able to change the
password, and she will be the only one who has the ability to enter, and the team bargains
that she will be responsible for the project, and they agree, and please. She tries to follow the patterns, but she is surprised that they change to some extent. She can only open between them and the aliens, and she tries to communicate with them in all programming languages, but their languages are very difficult and surpass human intelligence, so she decides to make a language of her own, and she sends videos of Captain Mora while she is filming herself with trees, birds and children, and suddenly she hears a voice says Waju, so she speaks into the microphone and calls Captain Morit, and he goes to his house with Jamila, but he discovers that his mother died because of aliens, so he decides that he kills them himself, and Jamila shows the rest of his drawings, which remain similar to aliens, and he tells her that he has seen all this for a long time and that he feels that he will be able to talk to him. This is because every time he has an epileptic seizure, he sees or hears strange things, and he felt that if he entered into a long epileptic seizure, he could communicate with the creatures in a way. The longer he understands what they want. With a beautiful agreement, she helps him, and they decide to go to the hospital, and this is because when he enters into a state of epilepsy, they can save him, and they move together to the road to the hospital. At this time, he arrives from Cable to London, and he asks the commander to bring him back to America with a pilot, but the British commander refuses and expels him outside the airport, and he walks in the streets of London. He does not sit in a state after he loses hope that he will return to America for his wife, and on Casper's way home, he sees the army in front of them while he is fighting the creatures, so they quickly enter the place to hide in it. Suddenly, they meet in front of them, and they ask him to help them get to the hospital, and Puria Casper, the pictures he drew from the days, and it will be a distinctive sign for the American soldiers in Pakistan, and stay in the shape of a skull, and they say that he used to see the soldiers fighting the beings inside his mind. This is from 3 days. Trevor is shocked and decides to help them, and in one of the shelters, Sarah stays with Dr. Angela, who is with her in her courage, and they get closer to each other and kiss each other, and then Sarah tells him that she is not a doctor. So Angela tells her that she was able to save her family and the patient who was in the shelter before him, and if she has the audacity and improvisation, they will need it in their time. Sarah thanks him for her trust in him, and they go together to the place where her children are, but she can't find any of them. She keeps looking for them throughout the shelter until she finds them in the morgue, and those who have dead bodies have a metallic substance on them. It went from a liquid to a frozen state, and she sees her son Luke with the stone that she was able to use to kill the alien. In Arabia, vibrations appear in the liquid on the body, and there was a kind of connection between the mineral stone in the hand Luke and between the mineral liquid on the body of the dead, and one of the biologists comes and takes samples from the alien and tests them with hydraulic acid. But the organisms prefer to share in an arbitrary way and the cells multiply more, but the first time the strange stone comes close to it, the sample shrinks and gets captured by the DNA and dies at the time, and the military leaders come in, decide that they transport Sarah and her family to the Pentagon headquarters after they learn the secret of the alien's death, but on the way, the news leaks out to people on the car that was transporting Sarah, but she can run away with her children in the woods. Ahmed distracts people who want to kill Sarah. This is because they are afraid that the government will decide to kill the creatures and kill them with them, and Ahmed dies, and Sarah goes to a far place in the forest. Suddenly, in front of her, she finds a field full of cells of creatures. Satellite. So he passed away from her while she was with her. The stone. Suddenly, you will find in front of it the atmosphere caused by the creatures, and it will disappear completely, and they see something burning in the sky, which would be missiles. At this time, he arrives with the hospital, and the doctor agreed on his brain cells through electromagnetic radiation. Casper enters into an epileptic fit and finds himself saying his name, and it is the name of the communications engineer in Tokyo, and it turns out that Captain Murray herself is trying to communicate with Earth through the spacecraft, but human speech comes out of it in the form of frequencies in the language of aliens, and because Casper has supernatural abilities,
his mind can pick up the signals and frequencies from the alien spacecraft.
After the seizure, Casper can locate the objects in the hospital, and he feels that they are in his mind while he is in theirs. The first thing that tries to burn an object in them, he decides that he controls them through his mind and makes them stop and attack. And before the creatures attack them, they really stand in their place, as if they were a body without a soul. But then he gets very tired and enters into an epileptic fit and dies. Suddenly, all creatures on the planet die, and America decides to launch nuclear missiles at the space shuttle, from which Captain Moore's signals come out. May breaks down, but everyone tries to convince her that it is not the same moral signs, and this is because they were saddened during her repetition of the word Waho. That she was not breathing. It means that it is an artificial signal that aliens are delusional about,
in order to trap them. And all aliens die all over the world and safety spreads everywhere. And the whole world celebrates, they take to the streets, and communications come back again. And he can communicate with the forces in America to return to his city.
And she travels miles to try to forget the past, and find a new way for her. And this is with a loss that prefers to be hidden, because she has a feeling telling her that they are in the calm before the storm, and he gets home, and he finds that his wife is fine, and they go out to enjoy their time like people. In Tokyo, a message comes to MI that new frequencies have blossomed in the sky, and she comes out of looking at the sky at the time when Trevor looks at the sky and Sarah looks at the sky, and they see a terrifyingly huge spaceship in front of them, and the series ends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Ladybug Synopsis channel.